Welcome to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota. Today, this 15th day of March 2014, we're going to look at the Ukrainian situation a little here, and understanding that obviously the vote on the Crimean Peninsula is going to take place either Sunday or Monday on this thing, and it will likely go back to Russia or side with them. I'm not sure how the terminology is going to be, but the reality, we have a very serious situation in the world here, and I've been wanting to do something on the Ukrainian issue, but rather than just give my 2 bits worth of my opinion of the philosophy, I wanted to look in a deeper factual basis to give you guys some background and to give you an area that you can look at it yourself. And hopefully it doesn't get worse. This peninsula breaks away, and so be it. But the rest of the country stays together, and Putin doesn't continue to march his army and threatening. But there's some real reasons of why this is happening. And I know we've got people out there that are the Clinton worshipers, and I know we've got people out there on the political side that are Reagan worshipers. But the reality, when suddenly we're talking a Cold War situation again, there's some real blame to be laid both at Reagan for Mr. Gorbachev knocked this wall down. There is clear, and I was furious at the time, I remember, of Reagan getting all this acclaim for ending the Cold War, and the reality of it was that the Russian people were sick and tired of this domination by dictators in their lives. And as I've told you here before, and I traveled into China the day after normalization took place. It was all set up beforehand, but we just lucked out. Nixon, of course, was involved in that whole process. And the same thing happened in China. Mankind finally uses their head, at least from time to time in the history of mankind, and the significance about the Ukraine, it is a truly significant historical center of the world. You look at Wikipedia, and I encourage you to do that after hearing this, or as things start to roll out on this Ukrainian situation, because I don't think our media, our so-called journalists, have given us a true picture of the big picture of some of the significant things that have happened in that region of the world, the incredible strife, even though we here in rural America, rural Minnesota, hear about it, the bread basket. My dad was there with a Minnesota group of ag leaders, Rush Schwant, if anybody remembers, even as a commissioner of agriculture, and his roommate was the founder of Swan's Dairy from Marshall, and so there was a group of ag delegation went on a people tour, and one of the areas of Russia that they went into was Ukraine. I believe when I was in Russia the one time, I think I did get down into Kiev or a little bit of the Ukraine, but obviously that southern part of the old Soviet Union was truly their breadbasket, and even though with their disastrous collective farms that still produced a lot of food, and today we have our DuPont and our Monsanto trying to get in there, or in there in a big way, I should say, as far as converting that to higher yielding varieties and modern practices of the United States and the world, that type of thing, and modern corn hybrids and so on and so forth. And so from a standpoint of agriculture, you can see why Putin wants to be in there, because historically Russia depended on that for a good portion of their food, and when they had bad crops historically, they just went in there and took grain reserves and whatever from the Ukraine, leaving some years of extreme famine. And if you go on the Wikipedia and scroll down and read, it's just an interesting insight into our world and the brutality of mankind when mankind doesn't see that they have governing bodies that look out for everybody. You know, the informed TV principle here. We're getting at our two-class society here, and we've got to get away from that. We have to reward, obviously, businesses and ventures that bring new and needed things, but at the same time, when you put in 40 hours a week, whether the big shots, the Pharisees, the elites, and whether it's the Alexandria Lakes area or state of Minnesota or United States or the world, we as sound people believing in the principles of civilization, which is first and foremost have an incredible strong army so everybody respects you. And that's kind of what the informed TV, we're bringing the army of real people up to some of these elites in the city hall here in the city of Alexandria, and their chamber members and their business roundtables, and the Douglas County commissioners and all their elite friends, to see that we get some balance in government. We need to modernize the government here in St. Paul and Washington and from the world, because when we look at Ukraine, people, it is just astonishing, and that's your homework assignment. At least go there and scroll down some of the things that we're going to talk about here for a few minutes if my voice holds together. I've had a couple false starts because my voice cracked here, but I'm going to show you some things that I think you have to understand as this whole process unfolds. Here's the country of Ukraine in southern Russia, the Black Sea down here. What is it? Can't think of the name. Is it AROV sea in here, where the break between the Soviet Union on the east and the north, and where their fleet is historically been anchored. Here's the Crimean Peninsula that's almost assured to be voted away. But here's kind of the principle of the mess they have. And when you go to Wikipedia and look at some of the history as well as the modern history, this is an extremely well-educated area of Europe or even the world. And you look at some of the things where they even had some satellites. They have an aerospace industry. They've made many type of industrial vehicles that the European market is used. We probably haven't used them here, so to speak. But this is not some dumb, underdeveloped country. These people have been involved in the modern world, and yet at the same time have all these little hamlets or states within this state. And the other thing, when you look at the Wikipedia deal and do some research on it, this is one of the largest countries, if not the largest country in Europe, provided it all stays together. And I think the only other landmass in Europe that's bigger is the Russian portion of Europe. And so when you have a country that's bigger than Germany or France, people, it's significant. And when we look at it, what's the difference? I know you're already talking here. What's the difference between the red and yellow area? This is the area that tends to be traditionally Ukrainians, speak Ukrainians. The eastern and southern part here tends to be the area that was more influenced by Russian language, Russian input in the old Soviet Union, and maybe gave into their traits. Or this is where Khrushchev and Brezhnev kept pushing soldiers in, and boys have fun with the native girls, so to speak, and to bring that influence into these satellite countries to empower these thugs called communists. And so I want you to look at that map to understand here about 2/3 of the country is focused on being Ukrainian, the Ukrainian language. The other third, it tends to be more of the Russian. Yet at the same time, we want to give you a little idea on what goes on with income. is a country that of this size. Here's Kiev, the highest income region of the country. The red areas, or the darker red, tend to be the higher income. In other words, there's a lot of industrial jobs in the eastern part of the Ukraine. We've got oil and gas lines going through both from Kazakhstan, I suppose, to the east, and Russia. The breakdown as far as actual product coming through those pipelines that we hear so much about. If you read this Wikipedia summary or long book, encyclopedia, whatever on it, shows that the power of Russia is not the volume of product, it's the fact that all those lines go through Russia. So if they screw them down, as they have in a number of times, or at least a couple times in the last 2 to 3 decades, it shows the incredible power of Putin in this process. But look at that, the industrial side here, much higher wages. This is probably more of a rural area. I didn't get a chance to find a map. I'm sure USDA has got some things, but a one-man guy can only do so much. And you understand, here's the Black Sea, and here's that other body of water. I think it's AROV or something like that. And here's Romania and Poland up here. And just to give you a little idea, and some of the other satellite countries to the north. I'm not sure what the big mass is there. I'm blank for a moment on that. The other picture that I want you to look at in the process when you're watching the evening news or listening on the radio or newspaper, that type of thing. And so my critics say all he does is give his opinion. Well, I do give my opinion, but it's based on a lot of sound research and time in the real trenches, as they say. But here's the other thing that I want to show you that's so significant. When we look at, we showed the map as far as the portion, about a third of the country is pretty well dominated by Russian influence, Russian language. Yet I'm sure you look at the Ukraine there, most people speak both Russian and Ukraine. Here is the language difference. And the yellow areas that I'm sure you can see here, it's about all 90-some% dominated by the Ukrainian language, and I'm not sure what spin-off that is. I struggle with English here. I'm Slangovian from my speaking, and the other thing shows the influence of Russia. But the interesting thing on this map, as you get to the little lighter shaded areas, even in the Russian portion, at least 50% of that area still people consider or use Ukrainian rather than the Russian language. But you get down to the peninsula, the Crimean Peninsula, folks, you're looking at only 10% there use the Ukrainian language. In other words, if you were traveling in there and wanted to speak the native language on this Crimean Peninsula where the vote is going to be, it's 90% Russian speaking. Here we've got 50%, 24%, 90%. The 24 represents the percent that is Ukrainian. So 75% of the language used in there is Russian. Here 70% of Russian. Here about 50. So you see the complexity, and those of us that realize in our modern world, in our world of immigrants coming in, the concern many of us have of areas like California and southwestern United States of speaking Spanish, and even here in Minnesota, you call into a line for MNsure, that type of thing. And I'll do a little program on that. The frustrations I had when I signed up. I thought I got a year left before my Social Security, but it'll make a good story. But anyway, you always get what language do you want to speak, or this is Latino, and yet at the same time we have, when we go down to Minneapolis, there's just incredible strong Somali or the Islamic influence in a tight knit community. We've got some of that in our Wilmer area here with the city of Detroit. And what I'm getting at here is not to badmouth any other ethnic group, but the reality, if you want a sound nation, first and foremost, what do you have to have? You have to have people speaking the same language, plain and simple. And when we look at the history of Ukraine here, and it's massive, it goes back like 44,000 years or something like that. It's incredible when you go to Wikipedia. But the problem, if you don't have people that merge their viewpoints and conform to the people and the not just the ideology, but the reality of what our forefathers did here in this country, to not only see that we were secure and prosperous, but the next generations, and to the point of being able to oversee a big chunk of the world, whether it was World War I, World War II, the power of communism, and the other thing in this whole process that I want you to think about, we've got these movements of the Hillarys and the Kerrys now of diplomatic. We got to be diplomatic. You hear it on Morning Joe and programs like this, and the diplomatic approach first. The Ukraine fell victim to that a number of times. I think the example is in the 19th century, where they were incredibly prosperous, in 1800s in other words, where they were incredibly prosperous and just kind of ignored the outside forces of Europe and the Soviet Union, and for whatever reason this kind of left them alone and maybe traded and had enough problems with their own. But when you don't look out for your security, the incredible things that happen, and like I said, I had a couple false starts here. I hope I don't repeat myself too much, but when you look at the standpoint of Reagan of rightfully getting the end of the Cold War and putting pressure on to the Russians to knock the wall down, so to speak, but the reality is you'll find that the Russians cave from within, China cave from within, and here's the interesting thing that I want you to think about, that I haven't heard on the news media in any manner, shape, or form, but I think it's significant, and I think it puts a very dark cloud over the Clinton administration years and some of the diplomats, the UN, NATO, and short-sightedness and the same old fools that are dominating our Congress. The ideology of peace rather than the reality of peace through strength, and looking at there's villains everywhere in the world, and that's why I encourage you to go online and look at Wikipedia and Ukraine. It gives you this incredible view of the struggle of mankind from the very beginning. But here's, as we wind down in time, the thing that shocked me, even though I knew as a Cold War kid, baby, whatever, and grew up with the threat, the Cuban crisis and Russian bombers that would fly to New York. A friend of mine that a little bit older than me one of his tours of duty in the Navy was and most people here, especially young people, don't think of this in any manner, shape, or form. Those of us who are a little older, those old prop bombers from the Soviet Union with the big red star on, he was in the Navy and stationed somewhere along the East Coast, whether it's Maine or what, I can't remember, and I haven't talked to him for a few years, but he flew with the Navy version, I think it was the F-4 Interceptor, and his one tour of duty, I don't know if he did it for 2 or 4 years when he was in the Navy, where they met up every day when he was on duty, they flew out into the Atlantic and met those Russian bombers coming with nuclear warheads headed towards the East Coast. If Khrushchev, Brezhnev, those thugs gave the command to do it. And we were doing the same thing with B-52s and B-1s to the Russians. Yet if you mention that to a lot of our young people, and I think our schools have probably did a poor job of keeping this up. But anyway, he would tell me, he said, Al, you know, we would fly right up, we would come out, we said we would go by those guys that they were probably, the old prop planes were probably flying in that 250 to 350 range, maybe probably 300 something miles an hour. And he said we'd come by those F-14s, we would streak right over them at 600 miles an hour, a little bit below the sound barrier. And he said sometimes he would pump the afterburners if the boss had said make sure they know we're going to meet them. But anyway, he said we'd roll over that F4 and we'd come right behind and we would flick on a radar so they knew we were locked in. We had armaments on it, and he said then we'd fly up right on the wing. We'd slide in as top, maybe not over the wing, but as close to over the wing, and wave at the guys. And the finger was a true salute they gave those guys on a daily basis when he would meet those bombers, he said. And usually, he said, just as they got to the zone where it was a game, he said, we got to the point we recognized a bunch of them and wave at them and smile at them, but every time when they would peel off, and we would peel off with them, escort them either over the hump or towards Europe, whatever it was, knowing it was business, and it was extremely serious business. And that's what I want to get on to this armament deal a little bit. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, listen to this, the Ukraine inherited a 780,000 man military force on its territory. Just think of that. And now we want to drop our boots, our men in armed forces, as far as Marines and Army, to less than 500,000. This was back when Brezhnev or not Brezhnev, Gorbachev was breaking things up. But then it goes on to say, equipped with the third largest nuclear weapons arsenal in the world. Just think of that. The third largest nuclear weapons arsenal in the world. In other words, a big chunk of the former Soviet Union's military. And then in May of 1992, Ukraine signed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, I don't know how they pronounce it, but it's spelling is START, but it's not START Treaty, in which the country agreed to give up all nuclear weapons. The stupidity of that, people, obviously, we were all concerned about rogue nations and Islam and that type of thing, terrorists getting those deals, but the short-sightedness of people like the Clinton administration in here and European and Japan of not understanding, when you pull the nukes out of these satellite countries, all of a sudden, a little thug like Putin becomes a very powerful man and has the ability to march his soldiers right in there, even though the Ukraine still has a large army. What were they saying, 150,000 or something like that? But they didn't have 780,000 like they did one before. But and here's the issue. They gave up their nuclear weapons to Russia for disposal and to join the diplomats, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or a non-nuclear weapon state. And what I just said, suddenly no power, something that Putin doesn't respect, that the Chinese don't respect, the North Koreans don't respect, and some of these Islamic nations, as long as there's no nuclear power there, they've put their nose into things. And the Ukraine ratified the treaty in '94, and by 1996, and that's good old Bill Clinton and Hillary, right? The country became free of nuclear weapons. And I would say now we've opened the other book of Ukraine, of suddenly being there with Putin with all his nuclear weapons, with his fleet in that sea offside the Black Sea, but that peninsula, and now all of a sudden he controls the Crimean Peninsula, so he controls both sides of the strait where he wants his military fleet, with the ability, of course, armed with nuclear weapons. And suddenly this so-called and not just so-called, but this highly educated Ukrainian people with many talents are suddenly dictated by a thug. And the significance of this whole process is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it of the other satellite countries, Georgia and that type of thing in Eastern Europe? What encouragement does this situation now give to North Korea? What does it give to China? What does it give to some of these Islamic nations, and so on and so forth? People, the short-sightedness, I believe in diplomacy, don't get me wrong, but only backed by extreme force and the ability to deliver at a moment's notice. And historically, if you go to Ukraine on Wikipedia, you'll see how this great breadbasket area with a very prominent population has suffered immensely by its neighbors. And yet they had a period during the 1800s where they prospered, but at the same time, in the 1900s, they were just basically walked on by everybody. At the end of the 1900s, with the Soviet Union breaking up and suddenly they having their own nuclear armaments, could suddenly tell the Russians again, we're breaking away. The heck you are. Well, Moscow, you're gone. And they have the ability to do that. Now they're no threat whatsoever to Putin. And then I said, when you look at the economy out there, Ukraine made this massive, the largest aircraft in the world that you've seen it in the Russian army, but it's also been a freighter in the world, comes out of there. And once again, just like our two-tiered society here, our county commissioner, Charlie, was down at the Capitol. You see there, I know it was a Channel 11 or maybe a couple channels, where they want the restaurant workers here in Minnesota to have a two-tiered salary. You see the power of we get people of we need a high, big salary, but you people don't. And so on and so forth. And it shows things about the incredible corporations, modern buildings, a rail system. One of the things that caught my eye a little bit, they haven't kept up their highway system, it said, but they do have a modern rail system. Energy, they do have some energy, and from an electrical standpoint, they still, even though Chernobyl is in the Ukraine, melted down, and the majority of their power still comes from nuclear power. So see, they still do have nuclear industry, or people that know about nuclear, and they do export some of their electricity. And so power generation is a significant. They're looking at renewable fuels and within their total energy mix. They've got the internet just like the rest of the world. Be a great area for tourism. Like I said, my dad was there in in 1964, and I said, I think I got down that far. I've been to Secaucus in many places, I can't remember on it, and not being a writer, I should have made a history of my life. It is actually, even though I'm viewed as a vagrant in the Alexandria Lakes area, I've been in some very interesting places and very interesting discussions and very unique business views that everybody else said, you guys are history. I said, the heck we're history. You can't take on Merck. The heck we can't take on Merck. But the population decline is also an interesting thing, how they've been losing about 150,000 people per year, the death rate, and compared to the birth rate. And you go back into the 19th century, they had a period there, the 20th century, when Russia was in taking some of their food away when they had drought conditions, and even though it's a breadbasket, part of this high prices our farmers have been enjoying, that area, I can't remember which year, what was it, 2010, because they reference 11 with a big crop, where this area had extreme drought. And it is incredibly productive land, but the area is probably more about the size of, I looked up so many numbers on this thing as far as acres. I think their grain producing area was about like we have here in Minnesota, at least maybe that was their corn acres, and of late, and so when you look at a big picture of a country, there's just a lot of things. Religious-wise, is 62% of the country is atheist, and yet at the same time they have the Greek Orthodox Church there that I'm sure Putin doesn't like. And at the same time, when it says they're atheists, there's other statistics in there. I even heard something on TV not too long about 75% believe in God. So whenever you do things like we're doing here at Informed TV, you got, I and you and everybody else has to take things with a little grain of salt, but we're trying to carry programming here and a thought process of getting you people to look outside the box and to work outside the box, because history has shown if you stay inside the box, somebody's going to dominate you. And we have to be diplomatic, yet at the same time we have to be firm. And if to have a strong nation and a peaceful world, we got to keep everybody always coming to the middle and doing some compromises, but not the demands of the people on the right or the demands of the people on the left. The reasonable and sound positions that the right or the left have, based on sound economics and a secure principle, come together. Thanks for listening to Informed TV. I'm Ellen Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota.